This is episode number 64 with a returning guest from our 7th episode, Greg Wolcott, the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning in a suburb of Chicago, as well as an adjunct professor and author of the phenomenal book, Significant 72, Unleashing the Power of Relationships in Today's Schools. I first saw Greg speak on an EdWeek social and emotional learning webinar, and this is back in 2016 when he was talking about this concept that he was using in schools that he called Significant 72. And this concept wasn't even a book yet. I thought his idea was powerful, so I wrote it down, and I began telling his story when I was presenting to educators around the country, US and Canada. And I'll let Greg tell you more about that. But when I launched this podcast a year ago, I was looking for high quality experts to provide tools and resources that we could all apply to take our results to the next level. And I immediately thought of Greg. We've kept in touch over the entire year since we started, and he's reached out to me with thoughts and ideas of how he sees each episode being applied within his schools. And then we brainstorm new ideas or applications of how the content can help education and the corporate sectors. He makes connections between speakers that I might not have seen and has been an invaluable resource for me to keep moving forward with new speakers and ideas. Welcome back, Greg, and thank you so much for all the support you've given throughout this year to cheer me on. Your help means so much.
Well, thank you, Andrea. I'm so excited to be here. And just, as I've told you before, I just love the work you're doing and so excited that the impact that you're having with this whole podcast and just how it all started and where you've been with I want to make an impact even though I can't present at one event. And now the impact you've made is so huge and so much more than if you had that opportunity to present. And so honored to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Before I get to the questions, can you just give an overview of what you do over there and where the concept of Significant 72 came from?
So, I'm an assistant superintendent for teaching and learning, and that's my full-time job. And then part-time, I consult across the United States and Canada around relationships, social emotional learning, MTSS, things like that. And right now, our greatest focus has been in the area of social emotional learning and that relationship aspect of that. And whether it's, webinars with the Archdiocese of Miami or, yesterday a school in Philadelphia or whatever, just really working to take the ideas and put them into practice to make sure students are successful and to equip staff with tools that they can use right away. And so, that's our big goal. And it's really began with this concept of Significant 72. And so, as you know, I'm a research geek, all research, education, social, emotional, positive psychology, all the different areas. And one of the things that jumped out to me in the research is when I was teaching the grad courses is this research by this gentleman, John Hattie, and Professor Hattie's research talked about the effect size of things that we do in school and how much impact they truly have on students. And in that, he said that an effect size of approximately 0.4 of a standard deviation is basically a year's growth in a year's time, and said, really are the things we're doing in school having that type of effect? And one of the things that he researched amongst the many things that he looked at was the impact of teacher-student relationships. And he found that in that relationship, teacher-to-student relationship, has a 0.72 effect size. So basically 2 years growth in 1 year's time. And at the middle school and high school level, much, much higher than that. 0.9, 1.0 standard deviation of those teacher-student relationships. So the question I had then is what evidence is there in our schools that our relationship are having that type of effect? And so, that really has driven my work. One of the things that our school district did right away is implement what we began calling Significant 72, 6-8 years ago, which is the idea that for us, we start school at the start of the school year. We have institute days on Monday and Tuesday, and then kids come back Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So those first 3 days, 72 hours, we began setting aside totally for relationship building. Relationships with and between students, and how can we focus that time on really getting off on the right track. And then as the year goes on, how can we implement and continue to develop those relationships between teacher and student, and students to students throughout the year, and to create, a psychologically safe environment where kids can feel free to make mistakes, that they take feedback, that we can challenge them. We can't challenge them if they don't know we care. So how do we, reduce the social tension in the room so that we can increase the academic tension, and so that's the environment that we're trying to create. And now, literally hundreds of schools around the United States, Canada, and a couple in Australia have implemented that concept of consistently implementing those relationships, which then pushed people to say, can you write a book more about specifically, beyond just those connections, what is it that teachers could do to get those great effect sizes? And so that's where the book is, where it all started with that.
Wonderful. And what about your vision of where things are going to go? For us, school just ended technically in Arizona over here yesterday. So now my kids are officially on summer break, and then they go back to school end of July over here. But what do you think is going to happen as kids go back into school, from the fact that a lot of them didn't even finish school officially?
I think of, I think I start thinking of immediately the new, today was my first day, although I've popped in my office for the last 2.5 months. This is my first day back in the office, and full time. And I think of all the habits that I've formed over that 2.5 months. And I think our kids have fallen into certain habits. Mm-hmm. And by the time we start school in the fall, it'll have been 5 or 6 months. And so, helping kids, build off of those positive habits, mm-hmm. but start breaking some of those to get back into the routines of, interacting on a regular basis, interacting appropriately, all those things. I had 3 brothers, and I have 3 brothers, and when we grew up, if it weren't for my parents, the interaction between my brothers and I was probably not the best modeling, the best thing. And so those would have been habits that I would have put in place that would have had to adapt to when I get back, so there's some new norms going on, and we'll have to change those. And so, I think those more easily can be changed when educators stay connected. And I think one of the great things that's happened during this, is that I think we've realized that as educators, we got into this profession because of that social interaction. Not because of the curriculum we teach, but because of those connections. And so how can we, that's what drives us. And our students, they're missing that, we're missing that, so I'm hearing stories of educators around the country with Zoom calls and Google Meets and Hangouts, all these different things, and how it's really the connections, and I think what we're going to take away from this is that, kids aren't going to remember what material or concepts they were taught over this time, but they're going to remember all those different times when they got to connect. And that feeling that happens. And so I think that's what's going to happen. And I'm excited as I hear educators starting to realize that and relook at it in a different way, and rethink how, as we are talking, I was on a meeting with an administrator yesterday, and talking about how they are continuing the summer food over this, some food over the summer for so many kids that need that, and how, at the same time, we better be preparing to provide the summer relationships. And so he and his staff have put together a plan how they can stay connected to kids all summer long. And I think that's what we're realizing. And you know, he called me back this morning and with a kind of a group call with his school improvement team. And they said, you know, and so we brainstormed some ideas, and they're like, why did we never think of this before? Why did we think that 3 months off kids should just be fine, and that they still, especially those who come from vulnerable situations, don't continue to need that. And so I think we're going to learn and grow from that.
Definitely. And I saw on Twitter your pinned tweet was about the fact that educators really should be reaching out to students. And what did it have? It's got almost 9,000 likes and 2,000 retweets. I've never seen numbers that high.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how that happened. And that was the day that we, you know, driving home, the day that in Illinois we were, you know, when a school was announced that we were going to go on, you know, into remote learning. And I just said, hey, you know, we need to get out there. Teachers, you need to, you know, stay connected with your kids. You need to reach out via email or text or phone call and things like that. And yeah, it kind of blew up, and I'm so proud of the fact that teachers value that. You know, like you said, the likes and the retweets were cool, but I think kind of looking at the fact that, you know, in the analytics parts, 500,000 people viewed that tweet. And I think, you know, that shows how much as educators, why we're here. Mm-hmm. You know, sadly, there were some comments from people who were like, well, you can't expect me to do that. And you can't expect me to reach out to every single kid and things like that. And you know, I that was early on. What's been interesting is, you know, of those dozen people who initially had complaints, how many messages I've gotten back that said, you know what, I was forced to connect because of you, and here's all the positives. And so I think that those are the things that are good. I mean, our kids need that, you know, all need us.
Yeah, I had a text from my kid's PE teacher, and he said, send me your address. I'm going to come by and I'm going to put a 4 square in front of your house. I'm going to paint it on the drive. And so outside our house right now is 4 squares, and we've got kids all in the neighborhood. And so I haven't played yet because it's been super hot over here, but I thought, what a powerful gesture for the PE teacher to ensure that they keep going with some of the activities they were doing in PE, because there's no excuse now. We can go outside and throw the ball around when the sun goes down. So all these little things that are just, I'm sure there's 100 more stories like that.
Yeah, tons, and it's been cool hearing about them. You know, that's cool with the PE teacher. I've heard of classroom teachers that have chalked the walk where they've gone to the sidewalks of the home and then chalk wrote messages in the similar ways. You know, a school district in Kentucky, the local printer gave them the blank signs that, you know, I guess I would think of signs for voting. Yeah. And stick it to the ground in the front yard and things. And he just gave hundreds and hundreds of them to the school district and said, go ahead and write messages to your kids on these. And so the teachers got enough for all their students, and they wrote messages and put them out in the streets, or went around to the homes and tweet, you know, and put them in. You know, schools that, you know, from more low income situations where when they passed food out on a regular basis, they have handed out a manila envelope with envelopes addressed back to the school so that kids, you know, stamped envelopes back in so kids could write letters back to their teachers. And so that, you know, letter exchange, just because they didn't have the internet, they still could have that letter exchange, and, you know, and just, you know, things like that. Yeah, it's just, you know, I've always been proud to be an educator, and I'm really proud of what our teachers have done across the country in this situation.
Absolutely. Well, Greg, you sent me a recent presentation you did, and it was called Creating Connections During a Crisis, and I loved everything you presented. So I wanted to ask you some questions that dive a bit deeper into everything you covered. And I don't know if now would be a good time for you to share your screen so you can explain right now why you think it's so important to prioritize social emotional learning in today's educational space.
Well, thank you, Andrea. And so, yes, that presentation, in that presentation, I really spoke of the impact of COVID and not just the impact of COVID and the fact that we're hearing that, over the last 2 months, uh, prescription medicine for anxiety and things like that has gone up 40 to 60%. We know the impact that was there before and continues to be, and the and the vicarious trauma for people, as well as the regular trauma from people that have come from this. And I think, of three specific students and that I know, and Jada is a young lady, second grader, just the neatest young ladies, just super excited about school, and very extroverted. And when she gets to school, on a typical day, it's like her talent show. She is just out there, and everyone's interacting and loving, and she really, really is struggling through the situation, because in essence, her talent show opportunities and her strengths on display have been taken away. And she's at home now because of the absence of school. And her mom reached out because she was really struggling with, physical behavior with her siblings. I think of another boy, Mateo, that we worked with, and Mateo comes from a low income situation, and he is a seventh grader, and mom goes to work, and he is stuck in the home with his siblings and can't leave the apartment because of potential violence. And that the challenge he's having is anger. And he's taking out his anger on his siblings. And then I think of Becca, who's a family friend who comes from a home with not a lot of money, and has really focused, she's a sophomore, really focused on sports and academics to help her get a scholarship to get into college. And, now losing the track season, losing the potential basketball season in the fall, her mind is spinning with what could happen. And, all three of these kids are students that, may or may not have seemed like they have social emotional needs during the regular school year, but in this situation are having them. And so, how we address that, I've told you before, I'm dyslexic. And so I have to make acronyms for things because it helps me, organize information. And I think that the acronym I use in the book is every student has a story. And I think as teachers, we need to know that story. But from an SEL perspective, we need students to learn their own story. What are their strengths? What are their tendencies? What opportunities do they have for growth? What resources are available to them, and what their yearnings are. And we have to help kids realize that. And I think that's an important piece of social emotional learning. But then what we've learned, as kids start to understand the story acronym that we're going to go through from a personal perspective, they can also start to view it through a peer perspective. And it helps them interact better with peers. So via Dr. Lee Waters, who wrote an incredible book called Strengths Switch, I think when we think of strengths, it's what are those areas that students do well, that they choose often to do, and that they really get energized by, and we want kids to, really look at those strengths, especially in times of crisis right now. When we feel we have no control, it's great to lean back on those strengths. And so how do we get them to do that? And one of the tools that we use during the school year, and many districts I've been working with have been doing during this remote learning, is the Virtues and Actions Institute, VA Character Institute's free survey on strengths. And basically there's 24 strengths. We use this with adults in our PLCs as well, but students can take this survey, and it orders their strength from 1 to 24, what they use most to what they use least. It then gives a free printout. And so kids then, here's my sons, can see what their strengths are in order. And those top 6 strengths, their signature strengths, are really the ones that are going to be there if they take this test over and over again. And so we want kids to start seeing those strengths, believing that they have those strengths, and then thinking of times that they've used them. One of the homework assignments that kids are doing right now that when many of the schools we work with is My Strengths Monday. And they look at, it's a, kind of generic writing activity that can be adapted by grade level, but they choose one of these signature strengths and talk about how they use that strength in this week. Or how they could use, when they're struggling, how they could use that strength. And so, go ahead.
Just a comment from here. I actually went on that site to take a look at it yesterday, and I saw that we could actually do it. And I wonder, have you done this yourself? And I wonder what your top strengths are, if you remember.
Yep. I have done it several times, and it comes out the same. Curiosity is my number one strength. Creativity, gratitude, zest. I said creativity. I can't remember the other one, but it's awesome, and we use it just like you said. We use it with our teachers with their PLCs because it helps our coaches. It helps principals better get to know staff, and again, staff to get to know each other. And so, because our strengths become our identities, right? And so, until we, if we're searching for an identity, who knows where we may find it, or think it is. But when we can go through something like this, we have something tangible that says, yeah, that's who I am, and so we can start to connect and identify with that. And another free strengths tool for younger students is called Thrively. And it's a free survey tool, and for students from first grade on up. And so, there are several tools out there for that. So first piece is that strengths. The second piece then for kids and for us is to think about, okay, we know our strengths, what are our tendencies? And those are those patterns or trends that we display. What do I look like? What do I do? When I get frustrated in class, what do I do? When something is overly challenging, how do I handle that task? We know from the brain research and tying together some of your awesome podcasts, we know that there's 3 parts of the brain: the brainstem, safety and survival; the limbic system, the emotional part; and the prefrontal cortex, the executive function part. And that if that lower brain, if we get stuck in that lower brain and the brainstem wondering if we're safe, or the limbic system, wondering if we're loved, if we're stuck in that space, we can't get to the prefrontal cortex where all the learning happens. And so as much as teachers, we want to push to that prefrontal cortex, we can't really do that if we're not in the right state of mind. And we know, and we work with kids to understand that, or we work with educators to understand that, too many educators, stealing a quote from John Gordon, there's such a focus on the fruit, that prefrontal cortex work, and not enough on the root, which is that emotional root, work. And that if we want to get to what we need to do, we really have to focus on that root. And so we work with students starting at first grade to talk about flipping their lid, and that there are times that if you're functioning in that upstairs brain or in the prefrontal cortex, there are times when we're just going to flip. And so, the acronym for that is, food. If we don't have food, we get hangry, we're more likely to flip our lid. We know if we're lonely, if we don't have a friend, we're more likely to flip our lid. We know if we get irritated with someone, or we feel that we're being challenged in some way that really challenges one of our psychological needs, and get irritated, we're going to flip our lid. We know if we're super tired, we're going to flip our lid, or a little boy I was talking to about it. We were going through it and he said, I forgot one. And I said, well, what do you mean I forgot one? He said, you said flipped my lid. You forgot the T. And it was so cute. And so I was like, I got to think of something else to go with it, flipped. And it's threat. When we feel threatened in some way, we're going to flip our lid. And so we could be totally working in that prefrontal cortex and doing great cognitive work. If one of these things happens, we have that tendency, and it's normal. And we want to keep teaching kids that that's normal. And then one of the things we teach is that when we flip our lid, we start playing this mental merry-go-round where these thoughts just start spinning in our heads, and they start ruminating. And we know from research that, if you want to call them mind traps or thought holes, that there's these certain phrases that we start, ruminating on. For some, it's my fault. It's my fault. And I start, blaming myself. For others, when we're in that emotional piece, for other kids, it's blaming someone else. For some, it's feeling that we have no control, and that we go through that mindset of, gosh, I have no control over this. There's nothing I can do about it. Another one is it's going to happen again. And we can start perseverating. And there are, I think about 10 of these we kind of introduce them at different grades with kids, but there's 10 of these tendencies that start to happen. And so we want kids and adults to start thinking of, okay, that mental merry-go-round is normal when we're stressed, when we flip our lid, and here's some of the things we might be saying to ourselves, and those are normal to say that, but what can we do about it? And so, strengths, tendencies, then O is opportunities. And what are those opportunities for growth that really lie ahead for each student? We all have certain tendencies that happen. Mateo, who I talked about earlier, Mateo's tendency is to want to blame someone else. And when he blames someone else, his go-to move is to want to hit. And so, we've kind of taught him, help him process so that he understands that. So then, he can start recognizing it. And big idea we try to get across to students and staff is that, just because you're feeling that emotion, it's just information. It's nothing more than information. Fear is good sometimes. Fear is great if a bear is running into this room because it's going to cause me to jump out the window, right? It's going to cause me to breathe short, quick breaths from my chest, oxygenate my blood to give me energy to get out. Fear is probably not a good thing right now as I'm doing this webinar, because I wouldn't be calm, I wouldn't be able to relax and focus. And so, it's just data. Now, it's not telling us we have to do something, but it's just information for us, kind of, formative assessment. And I think that's important because, I use, as a lot of analogies, and my daughter had friends over to our pool. And I know you have a pool, and I don't know if you and your kids have played the beach ball challenge, where you take a beach ball and you hold it under the water, as long as you can to see how long you can hold it. And then pretty soon you get tired and it just pops. And so the girls are out there with their iPhones timing each other how they can hold it under the water. And I think that's what we do with our emotions. And that, we're playing beach ball challenge, where we're trying to hold those emotions under the water, and at some point we just can't hold them any longer. And so we want to talk to kids about how that's normal. But then we have to talk to them about how to process that information. And so the opportunity that the way we look at it is that our opportunity then is to really, teach them a very strategic 3-step process. Process 1 is recognizing those emotions. for Mateo, when he feels that he's starting to, ball up his fist, he needs to recognize that. Then he needs to categorize it. Okay, that feeling is anger. Anger is a normal feeling right now. It's normal to feel anger at times. All right, now what do I do with it? So recognize, categorize, and strategize. Now that I've recognized this feeling, or as Mark Brackett, who you had on, talks about in his book, Permission to Feel, you have to name it to tame it, right? And so we've got to recognize it, categorize it, and then to tame it is really to strategize. What tools am I going to use? So Mateo, when you feel like you need to hit somebody, what tools are we going to use to get you back to a better way so that you don't act? And as my friend Ray Jane at the Flourishing Center talks about, that recognizing is really an awareness stage, and so critical. That categorizing, though, is crucial to give ourselves that compassion. And one of your most recent guests talked about how, I think it was Lori, when you had her on, she talked about when we can name that emotion, it dissipates by 40% or something like that, I think she said. And I think, and that also, not only when we can name that emotion, that when Mateo says this is anger, not only is it start to dissipate, but he's given himself, self-compassion that, all right, this is normal, that everyone feels anger at some time. And then strategizing, I think, is really that management piece. And so I think by helping kids through this 3-step process, it really can start regulating their emotions. And so I think that's an opportunity that we can do with kids. And with that recognizing, as I said, what are the thoughts, body sensations, the tendencies, the go-to moves? We want to help them. Categorizing, we want to name those emotions. So it's crucial to help, social emotionally build kids' emotional vocabularies, and think about what, again, if emotions are just data, what is that data telling us? What does that emotion tell me I need, and what it's doing? And then lastly, strategizing. What do I need to get to that, back to my destination? And so, that 3-step process we found incredibly helpful. We also at that time, do a lot with, kind of giving a mantra to kind of relax. And so the mantra we use is, we're talking all the time in schools about I can statements for learning targets. And so, our self-target is, all right, I can inhale and exhale. And so we're trying to teach the kids that when they're having those emotions, when Mateo's feeling that way, or Becca's worried about her college scholarship, that she pauses a second and says, okay, I can inhale and exhale. I can calm my body and my mind and get back to that center point where I want. I can accept that I'm going to have good days and bad days, that there's going to be days where I'm really worried about that scholarship, and that I may lose it. There are bad days like that, but there's also going to be good days where I don't even think about it. And that, I can navigate forward in a positive way. And for her, what tools can she use to kind of calm her mind? And so, we teach kids, this process to, again, get themselves ready. And then there are great tools for that. One of my favorite is a free tool from closegap.org. Which is just outstanding, where in essence, kids are going in and they're checking their feelings, that it's almost that 3-step process right there built in the program. Mark Brackett, as you've had on, like I said, has his mood meter. And the mood meter where you're going through whether kids are using the app or adults are using the app or kids at school are using posters, again, it's that 3-step process. Here's where I'm at, here's what I'm feeling. I'm recognizing that, on Mark's, here's my level of pleasantness and my level of energy. naming that emotion or categorizing it into an emotion and then strategizing, what am I going to do next? So there are tools out there. A colleague of mine has developed another one, Class Catalyst. The nice thing about Class Catalyst, that it has strategies built in, and it starts teaching kids a strategy bank. And so, there's computerized programs for that. But not everyone's going to have that computerized program with them, and so from a resource piece, we're talking about strengths, tendencies, opportunities. From a resource, we want kids to realize what resources they have to assist them, and the number one resource I think we have from a social emotional perspective is our vagus nerve. And I think anyone who talks about social emotional learning and doesn't think of how students can use the vagus nerve and understand that is 5 years behind. And I think your podcasts have proven that. Cutting edge is, all right, the vagus nerve is where it's at and how we calm ourselves. And it's, we know that when we stimulate that vagus nerve, it helps put us into that rest and digest state. And it calms us. And so whether that be things like belly breathing, and we I talked about that example of fear with the bear. If right now I put one hand on my chest and one on my stomach, with good breaths, I should be feeling my, in a calm state, I should be feeling my, my stomach going in and out because I'm getting nice, full, breaths. When I do that, that stimulates that nerve and helps calm me, which then in process helps that even more. If I am breathing all through my chest and my top hand is moving, then I know that I'm in that fight or flight almost mode. And I'm using a different part of the nervous system. And so how can I breathe differently? So we teach belly breathing, meditating, mindfulness, EFT tapping, which I'm a huge fan of, havening, where you just give yourself some deep, firm, pressure in different areas. That vagus nerve. So many things like humming, yoga, sensory paths, and different movements in school. So many of these things can activate that vagus nerve. And so we want kids to know that that's a resource they have. And that these are strategies they can use to help get them more, regulated. And obviously, just the human connection piece is so important, that we have that human connection. Box breathing is my favorite, and that's a tool that I use with kindergartners and preschool kids. Belly breathing, where they put a stuffed animal on their belly, and again do those belly breaths. Just that light weight of the stuffed animal puts a little pressure on the vagus nerve and helps relax. The EFT tapping, where you say a script and you tap the different meridians on your body, that has been so powerful. We've had such success. We learned about EFT tapping, especially with students of trauma and who've had trauma experiences, and even some staff who've had traumatic experiences. And again, there's, hundreds of resources out there, Mind Yeti, Gozen, a lot of these different great resources that go along with that vagus nerve. And then lastly, or even the trauma tools in the classroom are great. And then lastly, so we have strengths, tendencies, opportunities, resources, and yearnings. What do kids really want and desire? What are their goals? And so we really want kids to be thinking about those goals. And we know that from self-determination theory, that we all have these basic psychological needs of, I call them the ABCs: autonomy, belonging, and competence. Feeling that we have control, feeling that we're cared for, and feeling effective. Psychological needs that we all have. And I think specifically now, in this COVID time, we're being challenged in many of those ways. We don't have choice. We're being forced in the home. forced to work, out of the house. We feel social distance and don't have that belonging. And then we feel, for many of us, we don't feel competent because, especially in education right now, because I was never taught how to teach remote learning. And so all of these things, when any one of those, or in this situation for many, all three, are not met, the stress and anxiety, increases. So, what are we yearning for? What are those things? And so we know from autonomy, the autonomy piece, we know, and Edutopia just did a great study, that in this remote learning experience, kids who were given autonomy in their activities completed 90% more of their at-home schoolwork than other kids, if they were given some autonomy in it. And so we do a lot of those writing activities, Genius Hour, passion projects. So for Monday, My Strengths Monday, Tuesday, for middle school, high school kids, TED Talk Tuesday, and we say, go to you can Google best TED Talks for middle school, high school kids. You'll see a whole list of those. And kids, pick one of those and write about it. Teammate Tuesday could be for younger kids, someone who really helped them that way, a teammate that helped them become as successful. And those have been cute, as we've seen. The cutest one was the lady who packs my groceries at the grocery store gets my teammate award, because she's got to touch everyone's food and see everyone at the store, even the sick people, but she's doing that for me. And so things like that, what went well Wednesdays for gratitude, and Thankful Thursdays or Thirsty Thursdays is really, I'm thirsty for knowledge. What's something I really want to learn? Fantastic Friday or Friday Folly, something that was silly, but those help with the autonomy, that belonging. As we said, how are we reaching out to make those connections, because they're so important. We're, how many times have your guests who talked about, how social the brain is. I think of John Medina when he was on, the social brain, and so we want to feel that we're greater, part of something better than ourselves. I've seen a lot of service learning, a lot of design thinking projects that really help. Kids in schools who during this time have had kids write letters to first responders or to people at nursing homes. All of those increase that feeling of belonging. And then lastly, competence. And how do we feel that sense of competence? And one of the ways that we found is the best way to feel that through goal setting. And so we follow the WHOOP goal process from Angela Duckworth at the Character Lab. And she talks about wish, outcome, obstacle, and plan. And she talks about, if then goal setting, where we identify some obstacle and then a plan to overcome it. And this, how powerful, she and Gabrielle Oettingen talk about how powerful it is to have this mental contrasting, where we say, here's an obstacle, I'm setting this goal, but I know that this obstacle is likely to happen. What am I going to do when it happens? And we have found and pretty much thrown away all SMART goal setting, because WHOOP goal setting has just changed our mindset and increased that competence. Dr. Jason Selk has what he calls the 100-second mental workout. And this is kind of like creating a mental highlight reel for yourself, and things that you're going to do. And it's another one that we've used to great success to help us feel competent, especially in these tough situations. So those are the, that's kind of that concept of story, and that acronym, and where I kind of tie it all up then is, in this time, I can't wait to travel more. And one of the places that my family and I travel to all the time is my brother lives in a small town in Wisconsin, no cities around except for Wabasha, Minnesota. which is where this movie Grumpier Old Men was filmed. I don't know if you remember ever seeing that movie. And so this town really has nothing but pictures of these guys everywhere, because it was filmed there. But they also have the National Eagle Center. And every time we see my brother, we go to the National Eagle Center. And the kids love it because, they get to see obviously the eagles, and they're literally, 6 feet from the eagles. And so my kids go, we got to go, Dad, we got to go. And every time we go, and we've been there several times. And my son, for the first time, realized that there was something wrong with the eagles that were there. And the eagle was sitting on the trainer's arm, and as the trainer was talking, the eagle fell off and fell down to the ground and was trying to get back on the eagle's arm. And when he did that, the eagle was just flapping with its one good wing and going around in a circle. And it was just heartbreaking. And my kids look down at this eagle as it's going around in a circle, and you just feel this helpless feeling. And my son at the time, looks up at me with his beautiful little blue eyes, and he says, Dad, an eagle needs 2 wings to soar. And it just hit me when he said that. And it made me really connect to where we are in schools and the world today. And our kids need 2 wings to soar. They need an academic wing and a social emotional wing. And too many of our kids are struggling right now. And I think too many of our adults are struggling because we put so much attention on that academic wing, but didn't build that social emotional wing. And too many kids and too many adults are going around in circles, not able to lift off because they haven't developed both wings. And so when I think of social emotional learning, I think that we have to, we have to develop both of those wings. And once we do that, then it's our job to help give flight. And we do that by really just unleashing our awesomeness. As educators, we've got a passion to help kids. And once we can develop those 2 wings, our great calming words and things like that, and our emotions and our support and those relationships are what then give the kids flight. And so, that's kind of my view of social emotional learning, and the success we've had is through kind of putting that into action.
That's so powerful, Greg, your acronym story. When I saw this webinar that you did, it really hit me with the strengths, because the strengths that this test discovered stay with you for your whole life. Like when I did mine, I thought these are things that when I was in 8th grade, I noticed about myself. So that's why I think it's powerful that you're doing this with students. I tried to get my 10-year-old to do it, and she wasn't having it. So I got to try another day. But just to have them figure out what their strengths are, then you've got a snapshot into where they're going to operate from.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've learned from all my colleagues in that positive psychology realm, and especially from reading that great book Strength Switch by Lee Waters, who'd be an awesome guest sometime for you. She is that there's a flip, there's a shadow side to every strength. So like curiosity is my number one signature strength, but one of the challenges is that I have a stack of 200 books in my office and at home to still read because I'm so curious. I keep buying, or I'm searching on Twitter and I see something that looks great and I send it to my inbox. And all of a sudden so there's but it helps me understand myself, and why I do different things and how I can use those strengths to my advantage.
Absolutely. And then it really helped me to see from an assistant superintendent's point of view, for credibility purposes, the resources, because for some of these strategies, they're not yet known or readily accepted, that you might be using them with success. But maybe in Arizona, if I start talking about tapping for trauma, people might not yet be ready for it. So it really does help to hear all the strategies that I've been talking about over here that I know that you're using with success. So that does help a lot for us.
Awesome.
Is there anything that you think we might have missed? I know that you've gone really deep into the story that we need to recognize for our students, for ourselves as parents, as educators, and even the workplace. Is there any connection here that you think we just didn't touch on?
So I think the piece, obviously I think this acronym has helped students. But I think I get most feedback from teachers who have said that now they better understand their own social emotional needs, how better to put in routines, to help, self-care, to look at themselves differently, to catch their tendencies, when little Jack, whose signature strength, one of them is zest, is got that zest button, volume turned way up, and I got to calm him. That I realize that, I want to say, Jack, pay attention, and really it's his exuberance, and that he just needs to learn how to dial that down, and that it's not me, and so I think it's that piece that we know, if social emotional learning becomes, that 45 minutes, Thursdays from 2 to 2:45, it's never going to be successful. But when social emotional learning becomes the basis for my classroom and part of everything I do, and how I create a psychologically safe environment in my classroom, so I can intellectually challenge students, when that happens, then social emotional learning can be successful. But that it really has to help us as well. And I think that's a piece that really is powerful.
Absolutely, I agree. And doing this podcast, I'm learning so much about myself. So this is such an incredible opportunity to not just interview people like you and share, but to now try to implement some of these ideas and try to get my kids to take the strength test and to see what happens. They're not going to always do what you want them to do. So you've got to, pace yourself with this and understand it's a process, that we're not going to all get everything perfect, but we've got tons of ideas and resources now to implement. And Greg, I want to thank you so much for taking your time to share your significant 72 book, your story, ideas, and resources, and for making the neuroscience SEL connection. So that was powerful for me to have you come in and say, I see it, and here's what we're doing. It really does help to bring credibility to what we're doing here. So if anyone wants to learn more, they can go to significant72.com to get your book, and they can find you on Twitter, Greg J. Wolcott, to reach you. Is there any other place that they can reach you, or anything else that you're working on that you want to share about?
No, I appreciate it. We are, as we're getting the ideas more in schools, we're starting a center for school, for social emotional learning in schools. The Learner First Center for Social Emotional Learning in schools, so that we can really, everyday practices, and instead of just program after program. There's a place for programs in a well-developed social emotional learning plan, but we need to go beyond that into everyday practices that teachers can do on the fly. When I come in from recess and see my kids are too hyped up, I need to know that box breathing is a tool I can use with them, or the belly breathing, things like that. So we want to put together a place that has, free resources where people can just go and get them.
Love it. Well, I'll continue to follow and support everything that you're doing. And I want to thank you again for all your ideas that are impacting the success of us here with the podcast.
Well, thank you always for what you're doing, because I look forward every week to your podcasts and how I can take what you're learning, what you're teaching, and what your guests are sharing, and how we continue to translate that into schools. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Greg.